Today we're making Tiger's Milk from the 1939 Gentleman's Companion. The Gentleman's Companion is still one of the most important books in the proliferation of tropical cocktails. First published in 1939 and written by Charles H. Baker Jr., it's a 2-volume collection that serves as both a guide to worldly travel and a classic compendium of food and drink recipes. And while there are recipes, it's not your typical recipe book. Baker provides recipes and stories gathered during his travels across the world, and it's organized like a memoir of his travels and not just a list of drink specs. The recipes are accompanied by anecdotes, and they capture the culture, the history, and Baker's own experiences, an Anthony Bourdain-like experience long before the days of no reservations. The book is still important today, but if we look back, we can see how many exotic ingredients and cocktails that were rare at the time were first introduced to many through Baker's travels and writings. The book is funny, it's sophisticated, it's very out of date in some instances, but ultimately served as a rare glimpse into what it would have been like to travel the world in the 1920s and the 1930s, consuming many cocktails along the way. There are dozens of drinks that I've been interested in sharing here, but the one that has always stood out to me is Tiger's Milk. That's number 1, number 2, and number 3. The Tiger's Milk number 1, shared by Baker, is from Peking, or what we would now consider Bejing, at the Grand Hotel des Wagon-Lits. The drink found its way to the hotel by a gentleman named Seaholm, apparently or possibly a relative to the King of Sweden. And the most important aspect of Tiger's Milk number 1 is to never use anything other than a fine brandy or champagne fine brandy, which is not champagne that we think about today, but it's a style of cognac. And it stipulates not to use your standard cognacs. I think you'd be fine here if you were just using any cognac or brandy, but today I'll be using this Remy Martin 1738. The recipe calls for sugar or grenadine, heavy cream, milk, and that's it. Now during this time, a jigger is 1.5 ounces if you're wondering about the conversions here. Baker comes across Tiger's Milk number 2, which showed up in Bangkok, somehow migrating from Bejing and now at the Phaya Thai Palace. The main differences here are the use of brandy and Bacardi Gold Seal rum as the base spirit. And finally, we come across Tiger's Milk number 3. This is a West Indian picker-upper from the windward side of Jamaica, according to Baker, and dedicated to their friend, gentleman and Rhodes Scholar Emerson Lowe, who lived there. Billed in the same as the others, but used Jamaican rum instead. So I don't want to make just one Tiger's Milk, I want to make all 3 of the Tiger's Milks. And I'm going to have these recipes since they include half a cup of milk, half a cup of cream, and 3 3/4 ounces of spirit. I'm going to start with 1 heaping teaspoon of sugar, and for Tiger's Milk number 2, I'm going to use grenadine for that one. 1/4 cup or 2 ounces of heavy cream, 1/4 cup or 2 ounces of milk, and then 2 ounces of our spirits. And then a dash of cinnamon or nutmeg is optional, but not authentic, but I like it here, so I'm going to do that. So there you go, Tiger's Milk number 1, 2, and 3 from the Gentleman's Companion. Now looking at these color alone, you can't actually tell which one has the grenadine. It's really totally unnoticeable which one it is. There's not that much in there, just like a heaping teaspoon, and I use a heaping teaspoon of sugar for the ones with sugar as well. I think it's still going to need a little more sweetness. There's nothing else in there except for the milk, which has some sugar in it, but I feel like it's going to need that. But the recipe does say to, sweeten it to your preference. So we'll find out here if it's sweet enough and then add more sugar if needed. Let's start with number 1. It's nice and boozy. There's like a whipped cream head that's formed on the top of these. I can taste the cognac, but I don't know why you would feel like you have to use a certain brandy or cognac. There's so much dairy in there that it's not that strong of a cocktail. Yeah, it's just set up. There's a nice foam on the top. It's good. All right, let's try Tiger's Milk number 2. I think I like that one a little bit better. You can still taste the cognac, but there's just a little bit of that aged rum note coming through. Now in the 1920s, 30s, I'm not exactly sure Bacardi Gold Seal. It doesn't really matter to me. I use Bacardi 8, so a little more age to it than your typical gold rums. And it has a nice balancing flavor. And then both of these so far, the cinnamon, the nutmeg, great. The flavor, but as well as the aroma. It's very much like eggnog. So let's move on to Tiger's Milk number 3. It's good. The Jamaican flavor is not as pronounced here. I'm not too surprised. I used Appleton 8, which is like one of my favorite rums, but I think with all the cream in here, it's a little muddled. If I was someone who wants like big Jamaican flavor, obviously something with more funk, something like Smith & Cross or Dr. Bird. But I think they're all good eggnog-ish type cocktails. When you see these old recipes that call for sugar or grenadine, it seems like they're different things. But in something like this with so much coming from the spirit and the rum, I think that it's hard to tell which one had grenadine in it at all. But I'm going to add some more grenadine to each of them, about a teaspoon, to sweeten them up and see if that helps out to bring out some of the flavors other than just like the cream. Still good, but just heavy eggnog minus the egg flavor going on. It helps a little bit. You're still getting that cognac flavor, that like the brandy flavor coming through. And while I know some of you are going to be more into rum than brandy, when it comes to these, even though it's not a holiday cocktail, these holiday type cocktails, brandy and cognac just work so well. I don't know if that's a nostalgia thing or just what we're used to, or so many cocktails like that. But I do like that flavor in this drink. It's not very complex. Out of all the cocktails in that book, I don't know why this is the one that they're kind of calling out as one of the greatest of all time. It's good. I just looking at the ingredients, I was not expecting more from it. I think if you were changing this up, I mean, the thing you would do is make eggnog. You would introduce a little more spice. You would introduce egg to it, a little richer. It has this richness to it, which is like a little more flat because it's just like creaminess. But it's still good. It's still good. I still like it. It's just not maybe the best cocktail from across the world at that time, or I wouldn't imagine that it is. You know, that one feels like more of a cocktail because you're getting some of the age notes from the rum, but the cognac still comes through. You're still getting that quintessential cognac creamy cocktail flavor, like an Alexander. But it's not just that, and you're getting the aged rum, the aged Spanish heritage style rum, and those two are working very well together. It is strange and odd that the one with the Jamaican rum, it has the most kind of dessert, sweet-like quality to it. It's delicious too. It's just surprising how flat the Appleton came through, but the cognac on its own, cognac and the rum together come through more than just this Jamaican rum. So there are 3 Tiger's Milk's cocktails from the 1939 Gentleman's Companion by Charles H. Baker, the Tiger's Milk number 1, number 2, and number 3. Tasting history here, one cocktail at a time. All interesting. I love the addition of the cinnamon and the nutmeg to any cocktail like this. It's going to help make it seem more festive and luxurious. So delicious, but something you can and should play around with. You want to taste your way through the 1920s and the 1930s. I every time I do this, I think back to my college days. I had a professor, Professor Garone, and I always remember this. When you're talking about decades, time periods like 1920s, 30s, 2000s, with the S on the end, there's never an apostrophe. Never an apostrophe, okay? We're talking about decades. It's the 80s. It's 80S. There's no apostrophe. You put apostrophe in the front if you're shortening it to like 80s. It's like 1980s. It's 1980S. Okay, that's just something that stuck with me for the last 20 years, and I don't always get worked up on it, but a little pet peeve. It's not possessive of like the 1920s and 30s. We're talking about these drinks. So if you see that out there, you don't need to correct people, but just so you know, no apostrophe when you're talking about decades. And then shout out to my brother-in-law, John, because he got me this bottle of cognac on my wedding day. So thanks, John. It's delicious. Don't forget to subscribe to my Patreon, like the video below, and otherwise, see you in the next one.